All right. Johnny Tremain, continued by Esther Forbes and illustrated by Lynd Ward and published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. We are in chapter 11, Yankee Doodle. And so the war has begun. Johnny is playing an important part as a communicator who is staying in Boston. And all of the primary actors here have left Boston, and the soldiers in Section 3 were looking for the printers and the leaders of the rebellion so that they could arrest them. But of course, everyone is gone. They've gone out to the country. And so the Uncle Lauren was one of the last printers that was left in town, and the British had come to arrest him. But Aunt Jennifer had put him into her feather bed and was stitching it, and so it looked like she was stuffing the feather bed full of feathers, and Uncle Lauren was actually in there so that he hid from the soldiers and was not arrested. So that was pretty genius. And then at the very end, it appears that the British soldiers are being chased from the countryside back toward Boston, and the author compares them here to red ants. Those red ants were British soldiers. So they're like running in their little red outfits, and you can kind of see them scurrying across the countryside. And then flashes of musket fire in the distance. You can't hear it because sound doesn't travel as quickly or as far as light does, but you could see the flash. So anyway, Johnny and all the people in Boston are looking for and waiting for signs of what has happened out in the countryside. So Section 4, here we go. Getting 2,000 men, or what was left of them, for gossip was saying they had been well chewed, into boats and back to Boston would create just the confusion Dr. Warren had promised. But it would not be easy for Johnny to slip over. The soldiers were cross and frightened. He would wait a little until they were more relaxed, say about midnight. Before him, lighted from top to bottom, he saw the Light's house, and he remembered Pumpkin's uniform. Dressed in that, he might slip aboard in the confusion. So Johnny is going to impersonate a British soldier. He went to the lights. In front of the house, he saw wagons and carts and men loading them with furniture, chests, trunks, boxes, even old portraits. The lights were moving, and by night, and in a hurry. He went to the kitchen door. Mrs. Bessie, who certainly ought to have been superintending this moving, was sitting idly in the kitchen, doing nothing. Scylla sat beside her. She was doing nothing. Mrs. Bessie jerked her thumb toward the front of the house. Scared, she said. They're all going to London until this insurrection, as they call it, is over. The Unicorn leaves at dawn tomorrow. Gage has given permission. Okay, so the Light family is leaving America. They're going back to London where they can be safe from the rebels. And the ship is leaving in the morning. And they had to get permission from the governor, so he has given it. Scylla, said Johnny, don't you go with them. Never. We all had a terrible fight this afternoon when word came that us Yankees had beaten them hollow. All the other servants are Tories and are going with them, but Mrs. Bessie and I are Whigs, and we are not going with them. In the end, Mr. Light said he was glad we are Whigs because he will leave us here to look after his property. Gage has promised nothing up here will be touched. Okay, so Gage is making promises he probably can't keep. He's saying he's going to protect their property. But they don't want us around. Can't bear the sight of us, Mrs. Bessie said smugly. The very sight of a good Whig makes them furious. Mr. Light did have another fit, just a little one. Miss Lavinia is afraid if she doesn't get her papa right out of town and off to London, he'll die. She always did like London better than Boston anyway. They are leaving tonight, and fast. What's Isanna going to do? Izzy, Mrs. Bessie's lips curled. She'll go with them. "She will not," said Scylla. "Miss Lavinia has gone down to Hancock's Wharf to ask Ma to let her take her, but Ma couldn't give her away, just as though she was a kitten." Miss Lavinia was standing in the doorway from the dining room to the kitchen. She had on a black cloak with the hood to it over her head. She stood a moment looking about and said nothing. Johnny was on his feet. He knew he would never forget her. Never. Even when he was an old man, he would remember Lavinia Light, standing, framed in that doorway, saying nothing. Her eyes were angry and tired. The chisel mark was deep between the low, sweeping black brows. He had never seen her look so worn and old, and never been more aware of her beauty. "Isanna is going with me," she said at last. "Your mother, Scylla, has too many kittens." "Miss Lavinia," said Scylla, "you can't do that." "Can't? Your mother signed the paper, and you're a wicked girl to stand in the way of your sister's good fortune." A little diffidently, Isanna herself emerged from behind the lady's great dark skirts. "Isanna," said Scylla gently, "you can't go off and leave me like this. It's no matter what Mother says. Look, dear, if you go to London, maybe you will never come back. Isanna, don't go away from me." Lavinia was smiling under her dark hood. "I will leave the decision entirely to her. She shall be perfectly free to choose between us. Precious, would you rather go with me to London and be a great lady and wear silks and jewels and ride in coaches, or stay here and be just another poor working girl?" And then, to make the choice doubly hard for the child, she added a little maliciously, "Which do you love most, Scylla or me?" Still, Isanna said nothing. But even in her silence, Johnny could detect something of her desire for drama. At the moment, silence was more dramatic than anything she could say. "Izzy is no good," thought Johnny. "She'll go." Scylla was standing quietly well away from the child. She was too proud to make any further appeal to her. Perhaps, like Johnny, she knew what the answer would be. "Well," said Lavinia, "I haven't got all day. Which do you love the most?" Isanna began to cry. It was perfectly natural crying. Not even Johnny could believe it was done for effect. "I don't know," she sobbed. "Which would you rather be? A common person like your sister, or a fine lady?" "A fine lady," she sniffled and went on dreamily. "And I'll have a gray pony and a pony cart. I've got the gold locket already." Her hand went to her throat. Next she'd be saying she wanted a little sailboat. Even now she was only reflecting old desires of Scylla's. Isanna never could think up anything for herself. "Yes, dear, you will, when I am Lady Prior Morton and you my little protégée," she explained to the others. "I've been betrothed to marry my lord ever since I last came back from London. Papa is a very sick man. He could never live through a civil war over here. Never. He doesn't want to leave all his property to the mob. But what does it matter? My lord is so rich. This miserable house, our ships, shops, are nothing to him. And my lord never liked it that my papa was in trade. Until now, papa would not give up his trade, nor could I bear to leave him." She turned to Scylla. "And I promise you I will be in a position to give your sister the best care and training." "Training," said Johnny. "What's she going to be trained for?" "Isanna shall be an actress. I would have been myself, but my station in life prevented me. And then I am too tall. And besides, I can't act." Sorry, that is just so funny. She would have been an actress, except that she's terrible at it. Isanna shall be the toast of London. You'll be proud someday. Even over here in this dreary wilderness, you shall hear her name and boast that once you knew her. Mrs. Bessie said smartly, I'd welcome the day I was proud to know that Izzy. Scylla was not taking the parting as hard as Johnny would have expected. Now he knew that she had been through the worst of it months before, when first the two sisters had come to the lights. She had lost Isanna long ago. Now, Scylla, said Miss Lavinia, I want you to have some time alone with Isanna. You've been a good girl, Scylla, better than Isanna, but happens she is what I fancy. Now, go with her and help her pack her duds. Scylla said nothing, but curtsied and went upstairs with Isanna, who was once more sobbing. You too, said Lavinia irritably to Mrs. Bessie. You leave me, for I must talk to Johnny alone. Mrs. Bessie heaved herself up out of her comfortable chair and shut the door after her. The young woman sat at last and murmured more to herself than to Johnny, I must talk to you, Jonathan Light Tremain. Johnny raised his eyes in amazement. I wanted to tell you before we left. First of all, Papa never meant to trick you out of your cup. He honestly thought it was an attempt at swindle. I mean, that someone here in Boston stole the cup and then found a boy to pretend to be a long-lost relative and used the cup as proof. Your mother did leave Boston with one of those cups. Papa did not mention that fact in court. There really were 5. He implied no more than 4 ever came to this country. He didn't imply it, said Johnny. He swore it in court. Oh, well, what of it? Let me talk. You see, he never knew that his niece, Vinnie Light, had a child. He had it from your father's family that both she and her husband died of cholera almost as soon as they reached Marseille. You see, your father was a naval surgeon, a prisoner of war, while here in Boston. Oh, nothing very much, she added scornfully. No great fortune or title. And Vinnie Light fell in love with him. He was everywhere in society that year, although a prisoner of war, and, of course, the Lights wouldn't hear of a marriage. He, a Frenchman, and a Catholic, and they told her if she ran off with him, she would be cut off. And she was never to return. But she did. Vinnie was so wild, she went right ahead. A ship's captain married them. Then his family, of course, would have none of her, she being a heretic. And then he died. Now, they're talking a little bit about the differences between the Christians and the Catholics, and a heretic would be someone who does not practice the Catholic faith, even though Catholics are Christians. And then he died. They sent word to Papa your grandfather was dead, that both had died, but his family sent Vinnie to a convent, hoping the sisters would convert her, and there, 3 months after your father died, you were born. You were born in a convent in the south of France. Odd, isn't it? Why do you call my mother Vinnie? Oh, and by the way, if you've seen The Sound of Music, then you know that when young women didn't have a family, they would often go to the convent and live a life of prayer. But the convent would take all kinds of women. And so this Vinnie Light, who's pregnant with no husband and no in-laws, and her family has cut her off, that would be a perfectly appropriate place for her back in those days. Why do you call my mother Vinnie? We all did. Vinnie Light, the wildest, handsomest girl in Boston. I was only a schoolgirl, but she was so beautiful and so gay. Oh, if you could but have seen her. But I did. He remembered the sweet, sad face of his sick mother. Was the wild and beautiful Vinnie Light really the same woman? His mother, patiently sewing and sewing to keep life in her son's body. She wanted no more life for herself. teaching him to read, making him those smocks, knowing she had changed so much in such few years. She dared, as Mrs. Tremain, return to Boston so her boy could grow up there, learn a decent trade. He thought of her agreeing with Mr. Lapham for his indenture, smiling as she told him that when she died, he was to go there. When I first saw you, Miss Lavinia went on, I noticed one thing, but it set me thinking. I did nothing for a while, but this spring I asked one of my father's captains bound for Marseille to feel about and find out the truth. I did so behind Papa's back. Papa was already too ill to be bothered, but I knew he would want to do right. Like swearing in court there never were but 4 light cups. She colored angrily. That means she got angry. Please let me do the talking, the telling. Don't you dare criticize the best man ever lived. Johnny had his own opinions on that. What was the one thing? He asked. The way your hair turns down upon your forehead, that little peak. She was a dark girl. That widow's peak on her was very striking. And then that day in Mr. Dana's court, I did notice you walked like her, light and wild, like a panther, or, she shrugged, maybe only like a tomcat. I admired my cousin so. I may tend to exaggerate her qualities. And what did your captain find out? What I have just told you, and one thing more. Your father, the naval surgeon, was ashamed to be a prisoner of war. He told folks here his name was Latour. That's why your name Tremain meant nothing to us. That is my true name? Yes, but I haven't much time to talk. Only yesterday I told Papa. He's too ill to speak to you himself. He does want you to know that he did not deliberately cheat you, steal your cup. Mother did take it with her? Yes, it belonged to her. And her maid, Mrs. Denny, went with her. It was Margaret Denny who got her and you out of the convent and onto a ship her brother commanded, and so to Townsend, Maine. That's where I grew up. I remember Aunt Margaret. She died just before Mother took me to Boston. Yes, and Papa says I am to promise you that he will write the whole thing out in black and white. When the war's over, she shrugged, you can put in quite a claim for property, if there's any property left, which I doubt. Anything more you wish to ask me? Yes. What relationship are you to me? What ought I to call you? Mercy, I don't know. What am I? Why, I suppose I'm sort of a cousin. But you'd better call me Aunt Lavinia. He said it tentatively. Aunt Lavinia? You couldn't even secretly have a romantic passion for an aunt. The queer hold she had had on him for a year snapped. She went to Johnny, stretched out a hand, and touched the widow's peak. All that he had ever got from the beautiful Vinnie Light. Then she was gone. Gosh, what a great revealing section of this book. I hope you guys come back for the last parts, and we'll see you on the next video.